Hello and welcome back around the bonfire. It's the show that is definitely not accidentally live streaming on YouTube this time around. We're your first Chicago Fire victory Sunday of 2026 off the back of a 3-0 thumping of a CF Montreal side that is, let's just say, eager to get north of the border, but that won't happen for another month. Those poor souls. It's John back with Tim for yet another episode of the bonfire. Tim, I see a look on your face. How are we feeling?
I don't know if they are that urgent. I mean, like, they have been spending as much time on this side of the border as possible. I believe that they stuck around in San Diego until they arrived in Chicago. So it's not like they're going to their training facility to train, because I don't know that they really have the facilities to be doing it this time of year, which is just wild for an MLS team in 2026.
And then
So,
you
yeah.
and then you wonder how they have 2 losses by a combined 8 goals. Like, oh, maybe it's the whole no training facility thing.
Well, there's some other possible candidates there as well. Look, it just, yeah, it's I feel so bad for the Sea of Montreal fans. They are some of, like, the best fans in the league, and they've been through a lot. I mean, Fire fans are also in the category of fans that have been through a lot over the past, whatever. But, like, you could see the silver lining for the past few years, and it's finally coming true. But Montreal, it just is like going from gray to a different shade of gray to maybe black to maybe a lighter shade for a second, and then it's rough, man.
Look, hey, the bright side is at least they don't have to see it in person. And let's dive a little deeper, maybe into what happened here. Two clubs that have both fired Frank Klopas at different points in time. Actually, but before I do that, I do want to take a quick second and just give a shout out to everybody who contributed and watched the first episode of Hot Takes last week, this past Thursday, or if you've tuned in since. Appreciate everybody making contributions, both on the fan side, submitting takes, on the staff side, obviously. Shout out to Parker and Matt and Danny and Alan for putting all that together. It was a ton of fun to watch. Great experience for the guys, and we hope to continue to do it. I think we're looking March 26th is the date that Matt had put out for the next episode, so we hope to see you all there and keep this thing rolling. Now let's talk about the game that happened and the game that was won. It is nice to be here talking about a win. Didn't have a home win, Tim, as you pointed out numerous times, until mid-May of 2025. So you're getting that win in the home opener. First time since 2017 in front of fans, correct?
Yes, 2020 the Fire won, but it was also August because of the COVID stoppage, and there were no fans there, and so I think that, on one hand it counts, on the other hand it doesn't really count the same way. Um, so yeah, I mean, look, either way, you have to just take this, right? Like, it was such a dominant performance, as we're going to talk about, and honestly, too bad it wasn't Friday's weather on Saturday, because the temperature dropped about 30 degrees over 24 hours. But other than that, like, it's pretty much all you could ask for, right?
100%, man. And even look, for a 35-degree day, it was nice out. It was funny. I don't normally come in from the north side, and I come into the stadium from the north side of the entrance, and I'm like, oh, feels really nice in here. Soldier Field, like, kind of, like, not typically, like, not very windy right now. Normally I'm getting, like, blown around, and then I get to the south end and it's like, oh my God, 40-mile-an-hour wind gusts. It was brutal for a period of time, but I think the win made it worth it for most folks in attendance. Let's talk a little bit through kind of the match facts, what actually went in, what actually went on. Jonathan Bamba opened the scoring and his account for 2026 with a goal off of a save from Gillier after Leonardo Barroso sends the ball across the box. I
It
don't.
wasn't counted as a shot. I think he unnecessarily got on the way of the cross instead of trying to get the guy on the
That's
other end of it. But
Well, look, we'll talk about Leo a little bit later on because I think some unfortunate moments led from him showing up on the stat sheet in what was a great performance from him. But Jonathan Bamba still a ton of quality to finish that, and being in the right place at the right time. It was cool watching it back, seeing his positioning and kind of knowing where Leo was going with the ball. Fast forward to the beginning of the second half. No more action until Jonathan Dean sent off for denial of obvious goal scoring opportunity. Tim, I don't know what you want to talk about there. We mentioned it maybe being a little soft. The jersey tug ultimately is what dug him in. Anything you want to add there, details wise?
yes, the game may in fact be gone. No, look, I and looking at things, right, like, it may be offside. Now obviously the line judge was, like, right there. Like, he kept up with the pace, which, like, impressive to be doing that in some ways. His flag didn't go up initially, so, like, now they're also told if it's close, keep the flag down. So that's part of it, and this is one of those, like, they are debates of, like, is it changing the way that we litigate games because he's told to keep the flag down if it's close. It's clearly kind of close. Keeps the flag down. If it had gone up, whatever Dean had done, it wouldn't have been a foul. And so the red card wouldn't have counted. I wouldn't be entirely surprised if it gets overturned. I would be a little bit surprised just because there isn't really a 100% definitive angle, and they typically defer to the VAR if they've gone to the booth or just whatever happened on the pitch for that. Just because it's like to some extent you have to give the people that you're paying to do the job, some credit. But I think it's a tough call for Dean. I mean, it was unnecessary, and we can maybe get into that in a minute about how the whole thing happened.
Yeah. Look, well, yeah, we'll discuss it more. Ultimately, thankfully, not something that impacted the game too negatively for the Fire. Joel Waterman comes on immediately after that for Jonathan Bamba, who was likely on a minutes restriction anyway. So,
Yeah.
in a way, the timing probably worked well there. Jay Davila eventually comes on for Mauricio Pinedo right at the 90th minutes, and then stoppage time starts and the world explodes. Hugo Kuipers converts a penalty that was won. Tim, am I making this up, or was it won by Hugo Kuipers as well? My view there was not
He
the
did
best.
all the work to make that happen, and he was doing that work for 100 minutes throughout the game, and I think that that's one of the things we're going to shout at as well.
Yeah, it was well earned from Hugo. It was nice to see him get on the score sheet today. Again, I should say. Then in the 96th minute, Robin Ludd comes in for Philip Zinkernagel and subsequently scores the dagger, if you want to call it that, in the 90 plus 10 off what was, again, another great lead by Leo Barroso. Hugo Kuipers sends the ball in. It's deflected high over the goal, and Robin Ludd is there at the right place, right time to just clean it up and tap it in. A nice conversion from the new signing to open his account with.
Yeah, and I think just good to see him get off the bench and make a positive contribution. I think that he psychologically maybe needed that after a performance that I'm just assuming he wishes he could have to do over against Houston. It wasn't one of his more memorable performances in all of his years in MLS, and gets a few minutes and really makes the most of them, deep in stoppage time.
100%. And a guy who, frankly, we were concerned may not go, right? Greg said on Thursday he's questionable. I believe he did show up on the injury report, if I'm remembering correctly.
As questionable, right? And honestly, throughout the league, the injury reports are just an increasing point of frustration for me and a lot of other people because they come out at inconsistent times. Sometimes there's guys that are not listed as questionable that somehow end up injured the next day when like the team has had one very light training session at most. It's all over the place, and it's every other league in North America does it this better, and most leagues around the world do it better. But that's not the world we live in for MLS right now.
Yeah, it would just be nice to have some very clear kind of structured guidelines, right? I think you look at another American league like the NFL where questionable is you didn't participate fully. Even if you didn't take one practice rep, like you are technically questionable, and then you can at least have some context for what it could be.
Yeah, or guys that are going to be out for an extended period, right? Like as it stands, Andre Franco's on a designation that opens up basically his international slot, doesn't open up a salary cap money for the Fire, but that is allowing them to play another international player without another slot. That means he can't play for a minimum of 6 games from the time that he's thrown on that designation. That's not in the injury report anywhere to help fans and people around the league, understand the Fire's roster situation and who may or may not be playing, right? Because it means that Columbus know if they're keeping track of that, and I'm sure that they as a team have someone doing it, that you're not going to see Andre Franco next week. Not that with an ACL injury, that was a realistic possibility, but with guys with, shorter term injuries where it could be 6 weeks, it could be 4 weeks, whatever, and they put them on that designation, that just helps everyone understand what's going on. And it's just frustrating that we're not getting that from the league or from teams.
But hey, look, there's a lot of things we could complain about. Polymarket. Anyway, we won't make this a complaint about the league show today. Let's talk a little bit
I
of
predict
what
there may be one in the future, though.
Yeah. Oh, you should predict that in the markets. There we go. So anyway,
no, I'll put the thing out there. You can put the money on it, and we can figure out how
exactly.
To split it.
Yeah. If you're listening to this, we definitely won't. So don't go ahead and bet your money on now. Anyway, let's talk about a little bit more actually what happened pregame. That being the starting 11. So some major shakeups, right? Some we expected. Jonathan Bamba returning from injury. Jack Elliott also returning from injury. Maybe a few surprises. I should say, sorry. Jonathan Dean also returning after the birth of his daughter. Congratulations to the Dean. Shout out to Mrs. Dean who did all the work there. Johnny was just along for the ride. That's like a pro women stance, just for the reference. That can we cut that out? That sounded
Wow,
weird.
you're such a feminist by saying that. Yeah.
I am. I am. I
Childbirth
really.
mostly a women's endeavor.
Who would have thought, right? Who would have thought? No, but anyway, yeah. So congratulations to them. Very exciting. But Dean returns to the lineup as well, playing in that left back role with Leo Barroso on the right. I think the big surprises here. One, Marin Haile Selassie stays in the 11, moves all the way, making the big switch to right wing. Philip Zinkernagel moves centrally to the 10. Mbazeli Mboaze starts over Joel Waterman at that left center back role, and Mauricio Pineda starts over Jay Davila in that more six kind of central midfield defensive role. Tim, big
And all of
question.
those, to be clear, Imboazi did start in a three center back pairing last week. So, that's
Yes.
not a change per se,
No, but
a formation change.
I bring it up.
It is noteworthy
It's a
that,
decision that was made.
that confirms, I think, something that we have been saying that a lot of people, I think, have been assuming, which is that in the, center back depth chart, he's either one or two, and Jack Elliott is the other one of those. And then it kind of goes down from there. Joel Waterman, number 3 right now. I think Cups is going to do what he can to push for more of that. Um, and hey, competition in spots is what you want to see.
Absolutely. Well, and let's talk a little bit more about competition in those spots. I think the only one that was really stronger than okay to anybody was Mauricio Pineda starting in midfield. This is only his second start since July of 2025. It seemed like Jay Davila had kind of won that position firmly, squarely, starting in match day 1 right against Houston, and having frankly a poor performance, probably his worst since the dog days of summer last year. And Tim, I'm curious. I've got some thoughts on this, but I want to know your perspective. Like, is this to you maybe playing more the opponent, or hey, Mauricio right now gives us the best chance to win, and he's going to be our starter until Jay proves otherwise?
Greg talked about it a little bit after the match, and it's about what they see in training. It's about maybe a little bit of the performance the week before. I talked about this a minute ago. Robin Lod did not have anything closest to his strongest performance. Now, he was playing in a position on the right wing that I wouldn't expect him to see a lot. Philip Zingernagel also didn't cover himself in glory playing on the left wing, and that's not where we saw him for this one. So it's not like it is 100% on the Finnish midfielder's shoulders for that kind of a performance. But I think that it's what Pineda was able to show in training, and I think that it may be a little bit of Jay Davila also having a weaker game, and just giving Pineda the opportunity. And look, Pineda, I think, took the bull by the horns there. Like, he had one of the strongest games that he's had from the Fire in a very long time, whether starting or coming off the bench. And Chris Brady, actually, this is the second time he's done this with a player. After the game, we're talking to Chris a little bit, and he goes out of his way to call out his performance. Like, he tacks it on the end of a question about whether or not one of Brady's goals for 2026 was making the World Cup roster for the U.S. men's national team, right? Like, talk about focus on the team, right? Like, literally, hey, do you want to play for a different team this summer? To, by the way, I got to shout out my guy, which is, I think, impressive leadership, but also says a lot about Morey's performance out there.
Yeah, look, I thought it was fantastic. I mean, I feel like I'm somebody who, for a long time, has been a big proponent of Mauricio Pineda playing in the midfield. I think the interesting thing to me moving forward, Chris Brady did look more comfortable on the ball. I'll contribute a lot of that to. I do think Houston is a better team than Montreal, to be fair, right? And we'll talk about that in a second. I do think Mauricio Pineda played a little bit better under pressure than Jay Davila did last week, and I think that translated through. He does seem to be a little more comfortable as what's the best way I can phrase this? We talked about how Anton Saletros might be helpful for Jay Davila in midfield. I wonder how much of Anton Saletros' experience and confidence and ability allowed Mauricio Pineda to play his best role in the midfield. Does that kind of make sense?
I think that's some of it. I think part of it's
Mm-hmm.
just familiarity with the system
Yeah.
and all the pieces around him, right? I mean, it was a good team performance, and so I think that probably made it a little bit easier to come in. But look, he's a Pineda, the most tenured Chicago Fire player at this point. That was his 120th start, which just seems wild to say. He's a veteran, right? And like, look, one of the things Jay Davila is, I guess, only about what, like 6 years, 5, 6 years younger than Pineda, but not nearly as much first team experience. Um, and one of the things that I think has kind of dogged Jay a little bit last year was if he had a bad touch at some point, it kind of stuck in his head for a long time. And I think that that's what
Mm-hmm.
happened in Houston. Morey didn't have a completely perfect game, but he was able to put together a really strong performance. And I think that's one of the things that Jay is going to have to work on. And I'm assuming that it makes it easier on everyone to have someone that can come in and do the job. If not, whether that's a putting you on notice or whether that's a it's okay, like the team has other people that can depend on, and I can focus on my development in my way.
Yeah, and look, to your point, we talked about it in the recap, right? This is still a guy who's played, I think, less than 2,000 minutes of first division soccer in any country. So, I think that mentality is a huge piece of it, and you hope that he takes this the right way of, hey, look, I've just got to work on me. I've got these guys around me supporting me who want me to grow. And now I'm going to take this opportunity and come back and win his spot back. And I don't even know, you said this before we started, like, I don't even know that's necessarily winning his spot back. It may have just been, hey, I think this week Maury gives us the best chance. There's a very realistic possibility that for 30 out of 34 match days, it's going to be Jay. But every now and then we may just see the switch just to change things up slightly, right?
Yeah, and I mean, look, there's going to be injuries and stuff that happen over the course of a season too, and it's they're not entirely like for like. I think that Maury could also slot into a role like Salatros was playing. Now, Salatros I think had a really strong game as well, and Greg shouted him out after the match too for that performance. But it's I think it's entirely possible that we'll see different combinations of the Fire's midfield group, and I think, but with the performance of the unit being strong and being the same kinds of performance from the group, kind of regardless of which pieces are there, and that's great to have, right? Like there's some guys that like you're like if this guy's out, like we can still be competitive, but that changes the way that we play, and that's not the situation for the Fire's midfield right now.
Percent. And let's talk a little bit. I'm jumping around a little bit here, so apologies. But I think the interesting thing you talked about, kind of Jay's mentality. We talked, I think, a good bit in the recap. Greg even mentioned it in his post game presser after Houston of the team did not show up in the second half. Right, they stayed in the locker room. That didn't seem to be a problem. Right, and it was something we were concerned about.
Did it not seem to be a problem? I mean, look, it's
Against
another thing that Greg said, but I was thinking, look, last year against CF Montreal, the Fire went into the half up 1-0. They, in that performance a year ago, didn't look as dominant, but they were up 1-0, and I don't think you could have say it was an undeserved 1-0. This year, the Fire were more dominant, up 1-0. Arguably, it should have been 2-0 or 3-0, but it's 1-0. And I mean, look, I think that Montreal went into the locker room with their heads held high, and I think that they probably didn't feel like their game plan had to change very much in the second half. In
sure,
the second frame, yeah.
Can I just push back? Like, I don't think that was an issue of the Fire not being locked in. I think a lot of that was Gillier playing really well
He was
early in
great.
the first
He was
half.
great,
Yeah.
right? But like, how many times have we seen a team where a goalkeeper's hot, or like this has happened at the Fire? A goalkeeper's hot. You should maybe have two or three. You don't. So the other team is still very much in the match. And then even if it's against the run of play, one goal happens, and then that just becomes a story for the rest of the game. And I think, but the point I was trying to make initially was coming out of the locker room, the Fire didn't seem nearly as dominant as they had for the majority of the first half. And it seemed like, ironically, I think, until the red card to Dean happened, that Montreal had every chance of getting an equalizer. And ironically, I think the red card is what galvanized the team. It gave the team something to rally around. And after that, they became, I think, more dominant through stretches of the second half than we saw the team in the first half. I mean, it was more sustained pressure in certain points of the game. I think that they were more compact defensively. I think that they just stuck to the system almost perfectly. But so it's odd to say, like, if Dean hadn't gotten a red card, Montreal could have gotten lucky and gotten an equalizer, and then it could have been a very different story. But it's something that Greg mentioned, and it's something that, like, I think if you rewatch the performance, if you look at that, 45th minute or 46th minute on to the red card, it didn't really feel like the Fire were being dominant. And I think that it's something that Greg said, I'm going to look at those 11 minutes, which goes all the way, I guess, until the free kick for Elliott. So after that play had happened by several minutes. But what he meant was that opening stretch from the time the Fire came back out of the locker room, did they really come out of the locker room the way they could have?
Sure. I guess for if we want to talk over the full stretch of 90 minutes, there were moments where not as much, right? And if you want to use that, like, I don't. I don't disagree. I do think Montreal's attack, like the key word to there to me is like maybe Montreal gets lucky and gets a goal. Like that's the thing is like they did even in those 11 minutes. I think were fairly toothless, right? They weren't necessarily
And it
threatening,
and it was
right?
always one of those questions of that final ball and that kind of thing because they had the ball in stretches of both halves. You know, the Fire dominated possession of the first half, at like Montreal had it in some places, but when it got close, it didn't really get dangerous. But yeah, look, I just think that it wouldn't have been crazy for the result to have been different. Ironically, if the red card hadn't happened, you know,
Well, and
and I
I
think that
I
it's more of a question of like, did the Fire come out of the locker room having gained more in halftime than Montreal did, and I think that Montreal came out a little bit stronger in the second half, and the Fire would have were playing better before the whistle blew to end the first half. Like if they had just gone 90 minutes without a break, it would have probably helped the Fire at that stage. I think that it was that second break by the red card that gave the Fire that ability to reset and kind of get back. I don't want to say they were off track, but it I think really helped them step it up a little bit.
lock in a little more for
Yeah,
maybe for lack of a better
yeah,
word.
that's a good way of putting it.
Yeah, no, I think that's a valid point. I think it is a little like I don't want to be smug about this. That's not my intention. It's interesting to me to hear Greg say I'm going to watch those 11 minutes very intently. Like, dude, you did the halftime. Not to be that guy, but like you can talk about your team staying in the locker room like you're the guy who's supposed to get them out of the locker room, right?
Oh, I
Like,
think that he's. I don't think he was putting on anybody but himself. I
yeah, and
mean,
I fair,
it's
fair.
like, what can I be doing to get the team to come out of the locker room better? I think is the question, right?
Fair. Yeah. Anyway, the reason I bring this up partially to me is it's interesting, especially in that first half, and then even the back half of the second half. Right. We want to talk about post that red card on. A lot of different faces on the field, right? And I think that's worth noting, right? A guy like I think Jack Elliott, obviously Mauricio Pineda over Jay Davila. How much intensity does he bring as a little more of a veteran presence? I think Marin Haile Selassie playing in a more natural position. I thought Jonathan Dean's intensity in the first half, like I understand the red card happened, and as such, like you have to dock him several points, whether you agree with it or not, right? Like that, you have to. I thought he played really well until that red card.
I think he did too. He had a
Yeah.
very strong game, and like he was getting back defensively. He was. If you look at Dean's touch maps, I don't know why I keep on going back to touch maps with this one. I just think that sometimes I love a good old touch map, and it helps tell a story. For years, Dean's touch map would be a line along the edge of the pitch, right? Like he would run up and down the pitch, he would get the ball, he would get off crosses, he would get the ball and he'd pass it off to somebody else, but always near the edge of the pitch. The attack was really fluid in the first half when he was on and the Fire had 11 minutes. I mean, it was fluid after that too, but he obviously wasn't there for it. You saw him tucking in some places. You saw like at points it was like Zinkernagel would go out into that left wide space and he looked pretty good. You saw like at points like Bamba was playing behind Dean in certain moments of play, and it was all over the place and everybody just looked really comfortable and really fluid. And I think it's not that surprising that a guy like Jonathan Bamba can do that on a certain level, right? Because of his level, you know, his performance and the salary that he's on and stuff like that. For Dean, it's another tool in his bag that we hadn't seen from him as much before. And he
Mm-hmm.
has been like every year, it's like the guy finds a new ceiling to smash
Mm-hmm.
through and then smashes through that ceiling before too long.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And look, we talk about it with a lot of guys. Like the fact that you now have Jonathan Dean and Mauricio Pineda as depth players, that is kind of the difference, right? When you talk about a team that is good enough to squeak into the playoffs and a team that is good enough to potentially make a run in MLS Cup or make a run in Open Cup, right? That is kind of what separates good teams from very good to, trophy contending teams. And I thought, I mean, I love the intensity there because now if you want back into the lineup, if you're Andrew Gutman, who, don't get me wrong, he'll go back into the lineup once he's ready, or Jay Davila, you have to be able to bring that same level of play. And I think maybe more importantly, in some ways, that level of intensity. Like, I don't think the drop off is enough that you can just say, yeah, I'm going to be out there because I'm better. You also have to keep that same energy and same commitment to the tactic, right? For lack of a better word.
Yeah, and I think the same thing goes for Leo Barroso, who I don't think is controversial to say had the best performance of the Fire. His best performance in a Fire jersey, maybe his best performance as a professional. Like I not gonna lie, I was not watching a ton of him, or by which I mean any of him,
It's
in
a
the
Sporting
Portuguese second
B.
division before
Yeah.
joining the Fire. I mean, My God, it's hard enough to watch the Portuguese top flight in this country. Like, try to find lower division, I can't. Anyways, actually, you know what? It's probably all on YouTube with techno music now. Um, like bad Euro techno in the background, and if
Watch
you can,
this human calf play soccer. That's
and it's become more one since then. Anyways, look, that means right. Like he had a man of the match performance. That's what Greg's performance. I don't know how you can make a case for anybody but Barroso, but whatever. Um, if that performance level drops at some point, then Dean is right there. And you feel, I think, perfectly good putting Dean in. It's not entirely like for like on either side of the ball, but like that's normal because you don't have clones of players.
mm-hmm.
But I think that you feel really good about the level that Dean can give you on either of the fullback spots.
Yeah, and yeah, to your point, either that's massive, and yeah, let's keep the ball rolling, talking about excellent performances, right? This I think we talked about a little bit beforehand. It was a kind of a tough game to look at and pull too much from because Montreal is who Montreal is, and I just
look, I would agree with that if the Fire had played with 11 men for the entire game. I think that the red card, right? I think that that's where you start indexing it of playing down a man and still being able to do that. You can be a good team and Montreal can be a bad team, but like you still like that is not a given that you can do that, right? And I
yeah,
think that playing with that kind of a handicap and being that dominant with it does make the performance more noteworthy, right? Like you know, I published the 5 things earlier today when we're recording. It's out there if you haven't seen it. I think we learned a lot more from this one because of the red card. If the Fire had won 3-0 or 4-0 or even 5-0 like San Diego did against an 11-man Chicago Fire, I'm not really sure you could have taken as much from it other than, hey, man, it's going to be a long year for everyone in Montreal. But from the Fire perspective, I don't think you could take as much. It happening with the red card, I think there's a lot more to learn.
no, I don't disagree. I think the tough thing here is a little more like that first half was very good. I think you have to really, really like what you see. There were times where it looked like a 4-5-1. There were times it looked like a 2-6-3. My math right there? No, like a 2-6-2. I don't know. Like there was a lot of variability.
There and in the second half there was too a little bit. Yeah, like there were times when like the only Fire players that were on the Fire side of the pitch were Brady and like Mboazi, and Mboazi was like, you know, maybe not even really on that side of the pitch at certain points, right? And
Yeah,
like
he didn't want to be. Like he's like, let me
that
get
wasn't
in.
well, and like that wasn't him like going and wandering where he shouldn't have been. Like that was the degree of confidence the Fire were playing with, that they thought that guys could get back in possession so that they could just push like literally every number forward to even things out, despite being down numerically.
Yeah, and look, there are some numbers that I had that I wanted to mention because to your point, Tim, just in terms of like that was not a second half that they won. It was a second half, say from resuming play after Elliott's injury on, they dominated. Montreal held the ball for 72% of the second half. They accumulated .09 expected goals. They had 3 total shots to the Fire's 11. 2 of those were on target. The Fire had 7 on target. They had 0 big chances. They had 2, like this is the one that blew my mind. 217 accurate passes for Montreal, 51 for the Fire. And you
And
put
that was
up
the plan,
two
right? Like
two
that was the
goals
game
on
plan.
basically 2 xG.
That was the game plan, being down a man, right?
Yes,
And
it's just it blows my mind. Like
and
those numbers
0.1
should,
xG
should
for
jump
Montreal
out.
across the 90 minutes. Like from
Yeah,
Dean's red card, they had the free kick which hit Elliott in the head. Thankfully, Elliott's okay. And what was that, like 57th, 58th minute that it was finally taken? So that shot, it was a shot. It was not a shot on target. They did not get a shot on target playing up a man until the 88th minute. You know what I mean? Like that is over a half an hour of soccer without being able to get the ball on net, which is just nuts, right? And like that's the way the Fire were playing. Like the Fire were conceding possessions. They would let Montreal have the ball all day if they kept it in the areas they wanted them to have it in.
for reference, 0 of those shots in the second half came from inside the box. Yeah,
0 shots in total from inside the box too.
Yeah,
like
no,
it's,
they had 1 in the first half, but yeah, it's
not according to Opta. Oh, I guess they did. Yeah. They
yeah.
had the one.
I'm looking at
inside the
FotMob just
box
for reference.
just inside. It was what was that? A header Neil's
Yeah, I
header.
think it was
Anyways,
Neil putting it on. Yeah,
and
but
like that wasn't a high probability chance. I mean, it, zero point 0.1 xg to over 3 xg across the 90 minutes for the Fire, which is
it's crazy.
like
And
30 times your opponent's xg is just not a statistic you see, and it's certainly not a statistic you see when you're down a guy.
the last thing I'll mention before we kind of jump to our last big topic, the stat that I'm going to probably come back to throughout this year that holds up through the first 2 weeks, 5.5 is the number for corner kicks. You get over 5.5, the Fire are probably winning. If you are under 5.5, the Fire are probably not winning. Nine against Montreal, 5 against Houston. And it's
And
that
yet,
weird. And yeah, sorry.
and yet, no goals off a corner kick so far at the Fire.
Yes, no, but it kind of, and this segues really well into our man of the match discussion, right? And we'll both talk
But
about
yeah,
Leo
it
Barroso
does
because he
help
was
tell the
great.
story of the match and how it's going, and if you're winning balls in the right places and you're making teams defend against you certain ways. Last week, I asked Greg if he was concerned with the set piece performance. He said no. I don't think that he should be entirely unconcerned. I mean, they're trying some new things, right? And they got close. I mean, look, Imigazeli and Boazi is hardly the only Fire player that has not been able to be good on headers in recent years, but he had that fantastic header chance in what was that, like 67, 68th minute. And it just goes, somehow into like the 200 level rather than staying anywhere close to target. That's one of the moments that you're like, man, if that had gone differently, it also could have, I mean, it would have broken the internet in South Africa for starters if he had scored that.
Yeah, I no, I look, I agree with you, Tim. Like that. So no, I don't think anybody's great on set pieces. I guess unless maybe you're playing Columbus Crew in the first 5 weeks of the season, right? I expect that's something that will get better in terms of conversion as the year goes on. But to your point, right, what it means is you're getting the ball in dangerous areas and you're making dangerous plays, right? And I think that's you mentioned Mboaze. I do think let's talk a little bit about Mboaze's performance. We want to talk man of the match. I think we both agree very good performance from him, but probably not the guy you want the honor going to. I have to say I
And
was
you could,
more impressed watching back than I was watching live.
yeah, he did a lot of the things. I mean, his recovery ability was insane. Like he has jets. Like you wouldn't think a guy that is like that size and that height can move that quickly because he's not like one of those like slender guys that you think is just going to go like the wind. But like the guy can go from 0 to a really high speed really quickly. He clearly has really strong game awareness. He's reading the game at a high level. It wasn't perfect, right? And I think that he is, I think a little bit more than a little bit actually at fault on some of the stuff that led up to Dean's red card. Now, obviously, he didn't make Dean's hand go out and grab some jersey. But I think that if he had stuck to what the expectation was for where he should be a little bit better, that play ends differently. So it wasn't perfect, and I mentioned the header. Like, I mean, again, I don't know. I think that you maybe would have wanted something more there, but I also think some headers are going to get misdirected over the course of a season. And like, you don't blame that. You know, um,
He's
but
also
yeah, strong
20.
performance.
He's 20 years old.
For sure. Like again, like this is as bad as Imbo Kazi is going to be in this league, right? Like that's progress isn't linear and blah blah blah, but like he hasn't had a bad performance out of his giant sample size of 2, and I think that they're just going to keep on getting better from here. Like he will have a rough game at some point because everybody does, but you see all the tools and he's clearly putting them to use. And he changes the way the Fire are able to play compared to what they did last year, and I think that's what you want from him. And that's going to happen, and like that, yeah, and that's one of the things that's going to happen. Like not so much with the defenders typically is the way you think of the way that MLS rosters are constructed, but like there's guys that are more skilled than guys that he's used to playing against, especially at the league level, which is what he was doing week in, week out, and he'll adjust to that. And I mean, like, look, Lionel Messi's been dispossessed, more than
Yeah,
once in his
exactly.
career.
It's
Right.
more it's more impressive to me his ability to recognize the space and attack it. Right?
100%. And
Yeah.
to be that comfortable in a system when there's still that language barrier of him not being able to, like, not feeling as confident in at least speaking English, like I know he understands it. So the two-way communication is maybe not as strong there as it will be in time. And still being that good in the system this quickly, I think is impressive.
The other thing I want to mention about TLB before we move on from him, I don't know if you had this impression. I did. This is my first time seeing him live. I know you were in Houston too, and you've been at training at times. He's shorter than you think he is. If he's 5'11", he's 5'11" with shoes on, like he's maybe, in that ballpark. He's built super wide. He's very strong. One of the things they talk about, like in all sports, right, is you kind of look at the lower half and see how guys are built. He's massive. The ability, I know Prince Owusu isn't like the best forward in MLS. He's a guy who is in contention for a very good Ghanaian team for the World Cup. I don't know if he ends up going. TLB's ability to boss Prince Owusu is not nothing, right? He's a
For
full
sure.
head shorter than him and still, I don't want to even say shut him down, but physically dominated him.
Yeah, and also was able to get to stuff in the air too, which I mean, again, you're right. Like I feel like he's probably closer to 5'9", 5'8", but like everyone, I mean, look, everyone's heights that are listed as professional athletes are padded a little
Yeah.
bit. Um,
I mean to
but
say for a center back, the height is not what you'd expect it to be, and it doesn't affect his performance. And that's
right,
impressive.
yeah, for sure. And I mean, I think and look, at 20 years old, like I mean, he could still be growing, and he could easily get to another inch or two, or potentially more than that. Um, but yeah, it was impressive, and again, it's only going to get better from here, which I think really does help the Fire. Um, and look, Joel Waterman when he came in, he didn't have a ton of noteworthy actions, but I think that he did help solidify things in what was potentially a very dangerous situation for the team.
Mm-hmm.
Down a man like that, and to have him as the center back option you're bringing off the bench is a pretty good place to be.
And that's the refrain, right? That's the continued refrain of the depth is high level in terms of MLS roster building. Tim, there are a couple other guys. I think you'll take one. I'll take the other. Ultimately, you've mentioned Leo a few times. Do you want to talk about Leo as man of the match?
Well, okay, let me put it this way: is he yours?
So, like, yes, I'm prepared to talk about Hugo if you want to talk about Leo, though.
No, so I think that Leo, just one beat on him is, and then I'll let you have it from there. He clearly is the man of the match in this game. Like, I don't think you can really argue for anyone else coherently, except if you watched Hugo Kuipers' game in
Dude, yeah,
isolation for 100 minutes of him pressing from like the first minute, creating something literally off the kick, recovering the ball, generating. Look, it doesn't become a great chance or anything like that. That's because Gillier or Gillier, French name from a Chilean guy. So hey, man, uh, international game. Um, look, if you watch Hugo Kuiper's performance in isolation, you're like, that has to be the man of the match, right? Like if you
man,
didn't
yeah,
watch the entire game and you just saw what Hugo was doing, you're like, man of the match for sure. And the fact that Leo was able to exceed it, but just focusing on Kuipers for a second, he just so active throughout the game. He was doing all the things that you want a striker to be able to do in terms of getting in the right places to be dangerous. He was also pressing like an absolute force of nature. He was like cutting inside in some places and playing almost like another midfielder. He was there for combination play. He was getting back and defending at a couple of points and still able to get up the pitch quickly. And that again speaks to like the fluidity of this system in year two under Berhalter, at least in this one. And so just a really great performance from Hugo Kuipers. I said in my five things, look, through no fault of his own, he may be gone because that could be the way the cookie crumbles if Lewandowski arrives. But he's not going quietly. Um, and he's certainly going to try to do whatever he can to get in the best spot possible by the end of the season, whether that's with the Fire or with some other team and getting a better landing spot.
yeah. Look, before I talk Leo, I want to reiterate what you're saying because this is exactly why you heard all offseason Tim and I both saying like Robert Lewandowski may be a great player. I don't know that Robert Lewandowski makes sense for this Fire team. You're not getting that performance out of Robert Lewandowski. You're not. You may get 2 or 3 more goals over the course of 34 games. You are not getting that level of performance, that level of creation, that level of dropping that far deep into the midfield to connect play and spring open players. Like that was Hugo Kuipers showing I am a top 5 center forward in MLS and I am not number 5. I'm probably not number 4 or 3 either. It's very hard to have him much lower than a handful of guys, right? He's up there with Sam Surridge. He's up there with I mean, I don't know if I don't even know where Sun is playing. I haven't watched enough of LAFC to be totally honest with you. Like
Not
he's up
not
there is my
necessarily there,
point.
but yeah. Look, I'd
And
put
look,
Petar Musa as
if
maybe like Petar Musa is like what I thought the highest version of Hugo Kuipers could
yeah,
be.
that's fair.
And so like I did say to somebody, look, if you wanted to upgrade at striker, Lewandowski's not going to give you what Kuipers has been doing for 100 minutes just because of his age and everything else. He will do exactly what you said, more goals maybe. I thought, look, if you offered Dallas, a cash for Petter Musa and then sold Kuipers and it ended up being you're out a couple of million on the deal, do you do it? But performances like this, like he's playing like the best that Petter Musa has played in Dallas, and closing that gap, I think, is just really impressive.
Let me put it this way. I think if you end up going after Robert Lewandowski and he comes, there is a very real chance that you make money on Hugo Kuipers inside the league. I don't think
And
that's
yeah,
off the table. Like,
and that's
and
look, it's been kind of a quasi open secret that the Fire have been putting out feelers of what would you be willing to, like if we were thinking about offloading Hugo in the summer, what, is that something you'd be interested in? What numbers would you be at? In the league, he may actually have more of a transfer value because his current deal, the guaranteed part of it expires at the end of the year. Internationally, actually, believe it or not, like option years are untested, so it isn't clear if that would hold up if another team somewhere outside of MLS tried to sign him 2028. We've gotten close to finding out, but in the end, teams worked something out. But in MLS, he has an option year on what is a pretty good number. Um, he would still have to be a DP either way. So, you're not paying the transfer fee in cash. It would technically be on the salary cap hit if he's not a DP, but he's a DP anyways because of the salary. So, you really could do a lot worse than him, and you've got him under your control for another year, and then that gives you, time to work out a new deal, or you could do that beforehand. So he is an attractive, I think, player for teams that are looking for a striker in the league. Um, but he just becomes increasingly hard to move if you're putting in performances like this because you don't want to give him
yeah,
up.
Hugo just definitively, Hugo Kuipers does not deserve to leave. He deserves an extension.
Yeah,
Like
and he said it when I asked him about it in January that he and his family are both very happy here, and he's just focused on helping the team. And I think it's one of those things where, of course, that's what you say, but he seemed to mean it, and you don't have to mean it.
no, absolutely, absolutely. And now, okay, let's talk about Leo Bahosuk because as incredible, I think, as this Hugo Kuipers played, one of his best performance in red, Leo Boso was somehow better. Yeah, Tim, I think the comparison I've told people in the past, and I'm actually, I don't know if I've said this directly to you, I probably have, for Leo is a stronger, maybe faster, better defending Serginho Dest. That's his ceiling. And I think you saw that on display on Saturday. Like his ability in the final third, not only to win one-on-ones, but to take them on and create advantageous situations. He won a majority of those corners in the second half, in the first half as well. He kind of repeatedly embarrassed that left flank of Montreal's defense. Not that it was terrifically hard, to be fair. But then you also saw him playing, I think, really outstanding both one-on-one and kind of that more zone transition defense to break up play. Look, I don't expect his progression to be a perfect vertical line, but I think you maybe are starting to see why I think you at times have been very, very high on what his future is. And on a roster full of guys who you say, could he be sold for $5-10 million one day? I think it's not off the board to say he maybe has the highest potential of anybody. I lost you there, buddy.
There's a lot of high potential in the squad, right? Like, and so um, that makes it a little bit hard to be like, yeah, he's the guy that has the highest ceiling. I mean, there's just so many
Yeah,
young players in the
we're
roster that
taking
could.
shots in the dark, of course.
Right, but I mean, he's certainly up there, which, and he has the profile of a guy that could play basically anywhere in the world with his skill at, I think if he reaches his full potential. Um, what I thought was a little interesting is after the game, right? Like Berhalter said he was the coach's choice for man of the match, which I think is great. But he did almost a version of the thing that he did about Brady last week, where he almost gave talking through it's like through the media, um, gave him something to work on, and he's like, look, it's he was locked in, throughout the game, um, and what I think, it's like if we could get that from him every week, he'd be putting in better performances than this every week. Like he said, he's his own barrier. It could have been in that focus and determination. Literally every game, he's a top player. We've seen it before. Sometimes it's a little inconsistent. So after an incredibly consistent performance from him, just giving him that little extra thing to work on. And look, that's going to happen with young players. Like we talked about it with Jay Davila, where it's if you have a bad, touch in some moment early in the match, that can be the thing that is living rent free in your head for the rest of the game. Hopefully performances like this just put that in the rearview mirror for Barroso because, man, like he's really got the whole package. Like he was playing intelligently, he was getting into the right spaces, and just like what a motor, man! Like what an
Yeah.
absolute motor on him.
Look, you said it really well there. I think this idea of he could go and play anywhere, right? And I think a lot of times you see guys and you're like, well, I think, he could probably play in this league. He could probably play in that league. Like, I don't mean to pick on him because I'm not the biggest fan, but like Gio Reyna, his profile, probably not playing in the Premier League. That like we kind of saw that when he was at Nottingham Forest. But like Leo is good enough on the ball to play in Italy. He's fast enough to play in Spain. He's strong enough to play in England. Like he has all those abilities. And to Greg's point, I think the last piece is to put it all together all the time, right? Great players aren't great 3 out of every 4 weeks. They're great, 99 out of every 100 weeks. And I'm, just kind of pulling a number there, but that is kind of the next step for him to take. And I think to what we talked about before, having Jonathan Dean, who I'm not going to pretend is of the same level, but will just give you consistent performances, breathing down your neck is not nothing. And I hope that is kind of what's helping push Leo into that next echelon, that next tier of player.
And that's one of the things that makes, Dean's still a pretty young guy in the grand scheme of things, but, a veteran player now. And I think that's one of the things that you want veterans to do is help push you into consistency more than what is it you can do with your best. Like if you are doing everything right, like who can you dribble past and all that stuff, because like that's stuff that like some guys can do, some like, it's that other consistent part that I think is what you have to learn. I was thinking about this a little bit because when we talked to Joe Lowry and talking to some other people around the league, talking about how talented the Fire squad is, Leo isn't the name that came up that much. And I was kind of thinking about it. He played just over 1,000 minutes last year, right? Like, part of that was injuries. Part of that was the performance of Dean making him a starter in some key matches. That's not a lot of tape on him, and not all of it was great tape, right? Like you could see the potential, but you couldn't see it consistently. And so I think that if you're not watching every minute of the Fire, that's why you don't maybe necessarily think of him as one of those guys at the super high ceiling that can be really exciting. He's already played 180 minutes this year. So like he's played 1/6 of the minutes that he did in all of 2025 for the Fire. And it's, with games that happened in February.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Look, a top performance from a guy who I think we both think is going to be a top player in this league, but probably not for very long if things go his way. I think that just about does us for today. Kind of as good a place to wrap up as any. Last thing I'll say about Leo, a shout out to, and ironically, I think I'm gonna mispronounce her name, but Jessica Sharman, who had the call last night. The work she was putting in to get the names correct was impressive. She got Leo Bajoso, she got Mboazi, like everything was good there. So shouts to her for actually understanding how to pronounce people's names and doing that. Because not every announcer does.
Let's put it this way. I mean, everyone puts in the work a little bit differently. She spoke to me a couple of times throughout the week just about the pronunciations and about some of the other things around the Fire. And I think stuff like that makes a difference. Like not me necessarily, but just like talking to somebody that knows the team, getting to know the lay of the land. And it's really easy to talk about soccer. It's really hard to be able to do it in real time and that consistently and get everything right. And I think that both she and Ian Joy did a really good job with it. And, that just makes watching the game a little bit more engaging. Although I'm not going to lie, I did watch it once with the English language radio broadcast on, with Max Anderson and Joe Chats. And like, that was also a lot of fun. I will say I do miss sitting next to Joe, because with the red card, I was saying game's gone, man. Kind of mostly to myself at that point. Yeah. But if Joe had been there, I would have been to Joe.
Yeah.
And but
yeah. Well, to that point, shout out Joe Chats. Listen on WLS 980 AM. The new color guy for all Chicago Fire games there. So shout out Joe. Listen there if you are so inclined, because Joe's great at what he does. That brings us to the end of the show. Thank you so much for being here, for listening, for joining us for yet another episode of the Bonfire. Reminder, we'll be back midweek for a preview of Chicago Fire heading to maybe the worst place in the world, Columbus, Ohio, to take on Columbus Crew, a Columbus Crew side that just drew against Sporting Kansas City. So we'll see what the preview looks like, folks. But we'll look forward to having you back midweek to talk a little bit of that.
A defanged Sporting Kansas City because there was no Justin Reynolds available.
Oh man, well yeah, if they have no Justin Reynolds,
right?
Now
like
we're really
that's
concerned.
the ball game. Like there's that Jovic guy that kind of tried to do some stuff for them, scored a couple goals.
Did he score against Miami? I don't know.
I know. Yeah, exactly. Not the same level.
Yeah, but we'll be back midweek with the preview there. So keep your ears and eyes on that. Keep your eyes tuned to meninred97.com. As we've mentioned a couple times, Tim's 5 things we learned from this match is out now. Would recommend giving that a read if you want a slightly more in-depth dive on some of the details we discussed here today. Would highly recommend giving that a read. That's where you can also stay tuned for any and all news updates and I don't know, opinions and thoughts we may also have about Chicago Fire soccer and everything in between. meninred97.com. You can stay tuned on any and all socials, meninred97, anywhere and everywhere that matters. And then wherever you're listening to this, whether that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple, I don't know, there's probably another one, podcast platforms that you're listening. If you go ahead and subscribe, I'll shout out YouTube again specifically. If you're not following us on YouTube, if you could, we're trying to do more live content and video content this year. Stay tuned there if you wouldn't mind. And I say all that to say we appreciate y'all being here. For Tim, for our illustrious producer, Austin, I'm John. Thank you so much for joining us around the bonfire. Come on, you men in red.